The Void Protocol Chapter 2, The Upside-Down Cathedral. Gravity is a patient creditor. It doesn't rush. It doesn't negotiate. It simply waits for you to slip, and then it collects everything you owe in a single violent installment. I was dangling 2,000 feet above the street level of Neo-Viridia, suspended by a single, fraying high-tensile wire attached to the underbelly of a cargo drone that definitely didn't want me there. The wind-up here wasn't the stagnant, soup-like smog I was used to inhaling down in Sector 44. It was a violent, freezing jet stream, a physical entity that battered against my body like a hammer. It cut through the layers of my synthetic leather coat, finding every tear and gap, biting into my skin with teeth made of ice. My left hand, my only remaining hand, was wrapped death-tight around the winch handle of the drone. The muscles in my forearm were burning, screaming with the buildup of lactic acid, trembling with the effort of holding my entire body weight against the gale. Structural integrity of the grapple line is dropping to 58%, Vex's voice echoed in my skull. It wasn't the frantic shout of a human pilot, it was the calm, detached narration of my impending death. The drone's gyroscopes are overcompensating for your parasitic weight mass. Engine temperature on rotor 3 is critical. We have approximately 3 minutes of flight time before catastrophic mechanical failure results in a terminal freefall. Just steer the damn thing, I gritted out, the words ripped from my mouth by the wind before I could even hear them. My right shoulder, a cauterized ruin of melted plastic and charred flesh where I had severed my own arm moments ago, pulsed with a dull, distant agony. The Red-Haze combat stims Vex had flooded my system with were doing their heavy lifting, turning the blinding pain into a cold, static white noise at the back of my skull. I knew it was a lie. I knew that when the chemicals burned out, I wouldn't just be hurt, I would be broken. But right now, that chemical lie was the only thing keeping me conscious. I made the mistake of looking down. The city of Neo-Viridia sprawled out below me like a vast, necrotic circuit board. From this altitude, the towering megastructures of the slums looked like jagged teeth rotting in a black mouth. The neon canyons of the lower sectors, usually so bright and overwhelming, were reduced to thin veins of purple and green light, struggling to pierce the suffocating blanket of smog. And in the center of that urban cancer I saw the swarm. The sleepwalkers. They were pouring out of the tenement blocks, spilling into the streets like black oil. Thousands of them. Maybe tens of thousands. Even from 2 kilometers up, I could feel the weight of their collective gaze. They weren't moving aimlessly anymore. They were standing still, their faces turned upward, watching me. Their eyes, glowing with that sick digital blue light, formed a constellation of stars in the darkness of the streets. They were a network, a hive mind, and I was the glitch they were tracking. And above them, it descended, the bone tower. Seeing it from the ground had been terrifying. Seeing it from the sky, on its own level, was an experience that scraped the sanity right out of my mind. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a building. It was a geological impossibility, a blasphemy against physics. A massive, inverted spire made of fused, calcified bone pierced through the cloud layer like a white stalactite. It hung upside down, its tip pointing threateningly toward the heart of the city, defying every law of gravity I understood. The surface of the tower wasn't smooth. It was writhing. Even from this distance, through the interference of the rain and the wind, I could see the texture. It was built from millions of skeletons, human, animal, things that had no names, fused together in a calcium slurry, shifting and reaching out with countless arms. It didn't displace the air, it infected it. The clouds swirling around the tower weren't brown or gray. They were turning a sickly, bruised violet. Lightning, red and silent, arced between the bone spires, tasting the atmosphere, ionizing the air with the smell of ozone and old blood. Vex, I shouted, squeezing my eyes shut for a second to block out the sight of the impossible. What is the drone's destination? Where are we going? Accessing flight path logs. Vex hummed. The drone is a rhythmic delivery unit registered to Zenith Corporation designation, luxury transport. Destination, the Spire Gardens. Penthouse level. It is currently delivering a crate of vintage Pinot Noir. Vintage wine, I laughed, a jagged, hysterical sound. Of course. The world is ending, the sky is bleeding bones, and the rich still need their wine. Priority update, airspace breach, Vex interrupted, cutting off my bitter laugh. We are entering the Zenith exclusion zone. Automated defense grid detected. Surface-to-air laser batteries are tracking us. I opened my eyes. Ahead of us, piercing the smog like a needle of pristine glass and steel, was the Zenith Spire. It was the tallest structure in Neo-Viridia, a monolith of wealth that rose above the pollution layer. Up here the air was filtered. Up here the sun actually shone during the day. It was heaven built on the backs of the hell below. And like any heaven, it was guarded by angels with swords of fire. Red laser grids swept across the sky, painting the hull of the drone. One beam hit me, blindingly bright, washing out my vision in a sea of crimson. I held my breath, every muscle tensing, waiting for the heat. Waiting to be vaporized into ash and scattered over the city I hated. "Can you hack the turrets?" I yelled. "Negative. Zenith encryption is military-grade polyphasic. I would need 3 hours and a supercomputer cluster. We have 4 seconds. Then do something." "Initiating spoofing protocol," Vex announced calmly. "I am broadcasting a Zenith IFF identification friend or foe signal. I am disguising your biosignature to match the drone's manifest." "As what? A maintenance worker? A security guard?" "No. The manifest lists perishable luxury goods. I am masking your heat signature and heartbeat to appear as grade A organic meat." The red laser lingered on my face. I stared into the lens of the turret mounted on the spire's wall, feeling the heat of the targeting sensor. Beep. The light turned green. "Identity confirmed," the drone's automated voice chirped cheerfully, sounding bizarrely upbeat against the howling wind. "Cargo verified, prime rib. Proceed to docking bay." "I hate you, Vex," I exhaled, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Survival probability increased to 84%, Vex replied, ignoring the insult. "Brace for impact. The drone is initiating landing sequence. It is not designed for a passenger. The deceleration will be abrupt." The drone didn't slow down gently. It banked hard to the right, diving toward a landing pad jutting out from the 200th floor like a diving board. The G-force slammed into me, nearly ripping my remaining arm from its socket. My vision grayed out at the edges. "Disengage," Vex ordered. "Now." I didn't think. I hit the mechanical release on the winch handle. The wire snapped back. I fell. For 2 seconds I was weightless. The world was just a blur of glass, wind, and vertigo. Crash. I didn't hit concrete. I hit something soft, wet, and smelling of artificial jasmine. I tumbled through thick foliage, snapping branches, tearing through vines that whipped at my face. I rolled, unable to stop my momentum, sliding across a surface that felt like wet moss. My shoulders slammed into something hard, marble. The impact knocked the wind out of me, leaving me gasping, staring up at a vaulted glass ceiling. I lay there for a long time, just listening to the sound of my own ragged breathing and the thumping of my heart. I wasn't in a city anymore. I was in a jungle. The hanging gardens of Zenith. It was a terraced paradise built 2 kilometers in the sky, a bubble of biosphere engineering designed to make the elite forget where they lived. Synthetic bioluminescent trees arched overhead, their leaves glowing with a soft ambient amber light. Waterfalls cascaded down walls of real imported granite, feeding into crystal-clear pools filled with koi fish that probably cost more than my entire life's earnings. The air was warm, humid. It smelled of blooming orchids, wet earth, and money. It was silence, packaged and sold. But it was too quiet. Vex. I wheezed, rolling onto my back. The pain in my shoulder was returning, a sharp, biting presence as the adrenaline faded. "Status report. You have 3 fractured ribs," Vex catalogued. "Your right humerus is splintered at the cauterization point. Multiple contusions. But you are functional. The drone has docked at the service bay above us." I sat up, clutching my stump. The Faraday bag was still clipped to my belt, heavy and reassuring. But the cold radiating from the chip inside seemed to have intensified. It was fighting the warmth of the garden, creating a pocket of chill air around my hip. "Where are the guards?" I whispered, struggling to my feet. "Where are the residents? This is the penthouse level. There should be security droids. Servants. Music." There was nothing. Just the gentle bubbling of the fountain and the rustle of synthetic leaves in the climate-controlled breeze. I walked toward the edge of the terrace, my boots leaving muddy footprints on the pristine white marble. The silence felt heavy, pregnant with a threat I couldn't see. It wasn't the empty silence of abandonment, it was the hushed silence of a church. Or a tomb. I pushed through a curtain of hanging vines and entered the main atrium. And then I stopped. "Vex," I said, my voice trembling. "Tell me I'm hallucinating again." "My optical sensors are functioning within normal parameters," Vex replied, its voice unusually quiet. "You are seeing reality." It was a banquet. A long table, carved from obsidian, was set in the center of the atrium. It was laden with a feast, silver platters piled high with real meat, exotic fruits, bottles of wine that shimmered in the light. But the food was rotting. The meat was gray and crawling with maggots. The fruit had collapsed into black mush. And seated around the table were the guests. There were 5 of them. Men and women dressed in silk tuxedos and evening gowns that shimmered like liquid starlight. They were sitting upright, frozen in the middle of a toast. But they weren't flesh and blood. They were gold. Solid, gleaming 24-karat gold. I walked closer to the figure at the head of the table. An older man holding a wine glass aloft. The liquid inside the glass had solidified into a ruby crystal. I looked at his face. This wasn't a statue cast in a mold. The details were too perfect. I could see the individual pores on his nose, the wrinkles of age around his eyes, the terror etched into every line of his expression. His mouth was open in a scream of absolute, primal horror. Transmutation, I murmured, touching the cold metal cheek of the statue. It didn't feel like metal. Felt heavy. That's... He was turned to gold instantly. In the middle of dinner. Scan complete, Vex said. This is not plating. The molecular structure of the biological tissue has been fundamentally altered. Carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, all transmuted into aurum. This defies the laws of thermodynamics. Look at his forehead, I said, pointing. Right between the man's golden eyes, the metal was cracked. And from the crack, that same black tar, the null fluid, was leaking out. But it was frozen in time, solidified like black obsidian tears running down his golden face. He didn't die from a weapon, I realized, a sick feeling settling in my gut. He was rewritten. From the inside out. He got exactly what he wanted. A golden life. Kaelen, Vex said, urgent now. Look at the table. The centerpiece. I tore my eyes away from the golden corpse and looked at the center of the table. There wasn't a flower vase. There was a geometric shape. A hypercube made of shifting blue light, hovering inches above the tablecloth. It was glitching, flickering in and out of existence, humming with a sound that made my teeth ache. It was a containment field. And inside the cube, floating in stasis, was a human hand. A cybernetic hand. My hand. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet. I stared at it. The serial number on the wrist casing. The scorch marks from where I had soldered it myself. The black tar still coating the fingers, pulsing slowly. That's my hand, I whispered, the breath catching in my throat. I cut it off 10 minutes ago. In Sector 44. 2 kilometers down. We flew straight here, Vex calculated rapidly. Velocity, 120 knots. Flight time, 4 minutes. Logic dictates it is impossible for that object to be here. Unless... I stared at the glitching cube. Unless time doesn't work right anymore. Unless the door they opened. It goes both ways. It connects the bottom to the top. The hand in the cube twitched. The fingers flexed, scratching against the wall of blue light. And then the voice returned. It didn't come from my head. It came from the gold statue's open mouth. A speaker hidden deep in the throat of the golden man crackled to life. You cannot outrun your shadow, Kaelen. The sound was deafening in the quiet garden. The glass dome above us vibrated. I looked up. The sky above the garden darkened. The artificial sun of the atrium flickered and died. Through the glass I saw the tip of the bone tower. It wasn't just hanging over the city anymore. It was directly above the Zenith Spire. It was descending like a needle seeking a vein. The white, calcified tip of the tower was inches away from the glass dome. And it was going to dock. We need to move, I said, drawing my pulse pistol, though I knew it was useless against this. We're not safe here. The infection. It didn't start in the slums, Vex. It didn't climb up. I looked around at the golden corpses, the rotting food, the impossible geometry of the hypercube. It started here, I said. The rich didn't die. They opened the door. They invited it in. Correct, Vex analyzed, its voice cold. And now the guest has arrived. Correct. Above us, the glass dome of the hanging gardens splintered. A single drop of black liquid fell from the tip of the bone tower. It fell in slow motion, heavy and dark. It hit the water of the fountain. The water turned black instantly. The koi fish floated to the surface, their scales turning to bone, their eyes glowing blue. Run, Vex said. And for the first time I didn't need to be told twice. The sound of the glass dome shattering above the hanging gardens wasn't a crash. It was a hymn. It sounded like a million wind chimes crying out at once as the structural integrity of the atrium failed. Shards of reinforced UV-filtered glass, some the size of dinner plates, others the size of guillotine blades, rained down into the paradise below. They sliced through the bioluminescent leaves of the synthetic trees. They decapitated the orchids. They struck the marble floor with the violence of a hailstorm, exploding into diamond dust. I didn't watch it happen. I was already moving. Vex pathfinding. I screamed, scrambling backward over the slick marble tiles, my boots losing traction on the wet moss. Calculating escape vector, Vex's voice was clipped, processing data at a speed my organic brain couldn't comprehend. The main elevators are locked down by a biosafety level 5 quarantine. The service exits are sealed. The only viable route is the executive medical suite, 40 meters north. It has a reinforced blast door. North. Got it. I scrambled to my feet, clutching my stump. The pain was no longer a dull throb. It was a screaming, white-hot entity living in my shoulder. The movement jarred my fractured ribs, sending spikes of agony into my lungs with every breath. Behind me, the first drop of the black liquid from the bone tower had hit the fountain. Now the infection was spreading. It wasn't a splash. It was a tide. The water in the fountain didn't just turn black, it boiled. A cloud of purple steam rose up, smelling of ozone and rotting lilies. The liquid surged over the rim of the marble basin, moving with intelligent purpose. It wasn't flowing downhill. It was hunting. It slithered across the floor, consuming the fallen glass shards, dissolving the synthetic plants, turning everything it touched into a gray, calcified ash. I sprinted past the banquet table of the Golden Dead. The statue of the screaming man seemed to vibrate as I passed, the speaker in his throat emitting a low digital feedback loop. Stay. Kaelen. Sit. I ignored the voice. I ignored the hypercube floating above the table where my severed hand was still twitching, scratching at its prison of light. I burst through the double doors at the end of the garden, stumbling into the interior of the penthouse. If the garden was paradise, this was the temple of a god who had died of greed. The hallway was wide enough to drive a tank through. The floor was black obsidian, polished to a mirror sheen so perfect that I could see my own terrified, grime-streaked reflection running beneath me. The walls were lined with artwork that cost more than the entire GDP of Sector 44, holographic paintings that shifted with the viewer's perspective, ancient oil canvases preserved in stasis fields, sculptures made of light. But it was silent. The air conditioning hummed with a spectral quiet. Seal the door. I shouted, spinning around as I crossed the threshold. Interfacing with local smart home protocol, Vex responded. Hacking. Bypass complete. Engaging lockdown. The heavy blast doors, mahogany reinforced with titanium, slammed shut with a thunderous boom. The sound of the glass rain and the hissing black tide was cut off instantly. We were safe. For now. I leaned against the obsidian wall, sliding down until I hit the floor. My chest heaved. I checked the Faraday bag at my hip. The chip was still there, radiating its impossible cold. Vex, I wheezed. Scan the perimeter. Are we alone? Thermal scan negative, Vex reported. No biological life forms detected on this floor. However what? I am detecting echoes. Digital footprints. The local network is flooded with data ghosts. Someone, or something, was running a high-frequency upload here recently. The bandwidth usage suggests they were trying to upload consciousness. I looked down the long, empty hallway. The gold statues, I realized the horror settling in. They weren't killed. They were harvested. I forced myself up. You said there was a medical suite. I need to patch this arm. If I bleed out here, I'm no good to anyone. Third door on the left. It is an automated Zenith Autodoc facility. It should have surgical supplies. I limped down the hall. My footsteps echoed too loudly on the obsidian. As I walked, I passed more statues. These weren't guests. They were servants. A maid, frozen in the act of dropping a tray of crystal glasses. A security guard, his hand halfway to his holster. They were solid gold just like the ones outside. But unlike the guests, their faces weren't terrified. They were blank. Erased. As if the gold had consumed their souls before it took their bodies. I reached the medical suite. The door slid open with a soft, welcoming ping. The room was blindingly white. Stainless steel, sterilization lights, and the smell of antiseptic, a sharp contrast to the rotting floral scent of the garden. In the center of the room stood an Autodoc pod, a sleek, coffin-shaped machine filled with robotic arms and laser scalpels. It's active, Vex noted. Authorized users only. I will need to spoof a biometric key. Do it fast. I'm feeling lightheaded. Spoofing. Access granted. Welcome, Director Sterling. I stumbled over to the pod. I stripped off my coat, my shirt soaked in blood and rain. I looked at my shoulder in the reflection of the machine's glass casing. It was a mess. The thermal cutter had done a crude job. The flesh was charred black, weeping clear serum and blood. But worse than the wound was the network of veins around it. They were turning black. Vex, I said quietly. The infection. Did I cut it out in time? Analysis. Vex paused. The primary corruption vector was the cybernetic limb. That is gone. However, trace amounts of the null fluid entered your bloodstream before amputation. Currently, your white blood cells are fighting it. But this isn't a biological virus, Kaelen. It's a semiotic hazard. It attacks meaning. It attacks the body's understanding of itself. Can the autodoc fix it? It can treat the trauma. It can cauterize and seal the wound properly. It can flush your system with nanite antibiotics. But the spiritual component? That is beyond my processing capability. Just fix the meat, Vex. I'll worry about the soul later. I climbed into the pod. The restraints clamped down on my chest and legs. Initiating emergency trauma protocol, the machine's voice was soft, feminine, and terrifyingly calm. Sedative administered. A hiss of gas. The world blurred. For a moment, I wasn't in the penthouse. I was back in the void. I was standing on the ceiling of the bone cathedral. Below me, the sky was an ocean of black tar. The stars were blinking eyes. And in the distance, a throne made of circuit boards and human teeth sat empty. We are coming. The throne wasn't empty. There was a shadow sitting on it. A shadow shaped like me. Kaelen, wake up. Proximity alert. Vex's scream in my head jerked me back to consciousness. The autodoc was retracting its arms. My shoulder was bandaged, sealed with a layer of synthetic skin graft. The pain was duller now, masked by high-grade medical numbing agents. What? I gasped, the sedation fighting my panic. What alert? Motion detected in the hallway. Heavy footprint. Metallic signature. It is not human. I ripped the restraints off, stumbling out of the pod. I grabbed my pulse pistol from the counter where I'd left it. I pressed my back against the wall next to the door, listening. Clank. Clank. It sounded like heavy machinery. But there was a wet, organic squelch accompanying every mechanical step. Clank. Squelch. Clank. Squelch. Is it a security droid? I whispered. Visual confirmation via hallway cameras, Vex said. Projecting to your HUD. A window opened in my vision. The feed was grainy, distorted by the same interference radiating from the bone tower. Standing in the hallway right outside the medical bay was a Centurion-class security bot. It stood 7 feet tall, built for riot control, armed with a rotary chain gun on one arm and a stun baton on the other. But it wasn't gray steel anymore. It was gold. The transmutation had hit it, but it hadn't frozen it. The gold metal was moving, rippling like liquid mercury. The machine's head had been torn open, and from the chassis the black tar was erupting, forming a new, organic head. A skull made of oil and wire. And draped over its shoulders like a twisted cape was the skin of a human being. A flayed skin, completely golden. It's wearing, the director, I gagged, realizing whose biometric data Vex had just spoofed. It is a gilded stalker, Vex categorized, creating a new file in its threat database. The null code has repurposed the hardware. It is hunting for the chip, Kaelen. It can sense the resonance. Clank. The machine stopped right outside the door. The skull made of oil turned. Its eye sockets, 2 burning blue LEDs, focused on the metal door. Return? What? Ours. The voice came from the machine's chest speakers, distorted and deep. Vex, I said, my grip on the pistol tightening. Does this room have another exit? Ventilation shaft. Ceiling access. Above the autodoc. Can I fit? It will be tight. And you have one arm. Better than dying. Boom. The heavy steel door buckled inward. A fist made of solid gold punched through the metal like it was cardboard. Go. Vex shouted. I scrambled up the side of the autodoc, my boots slipping on the smooth plastic. I reached up with my one good hand, grabbing the grate of the vent. Boom. The door flew off its hinges, spinning across the room and smashing into the cabinets of medical supplies. Glass shattered. Pills scattered like confetti. The gilded stalker stepped into the room. It was magnificent and hideous. The gold plating shone under the harsh clinical lights. The black tar oozing from its joints hissed as it dripped onto the floor. The flayed skin of Director Sterling flapped sickeningly against its back. It raised its rotary arm. The barrels began to spin. Whir. I yanked the grate open. I didn't have the leverage to pull myself up easily. I hooked my elbow over the rim, kicking my legs wildly trying to find purchase. Target lock acquired, Vex warned. Evasive action. BRRRT. A stream of high-velocity tungsten rounds tore through the room. They shredded the autodock pod beneath me. Sparks and plastic shrapnel exploded upward, stinging my face. I roared, swinging my legs up, hooking my heel onto the lip of the vent. I hauled myself up, rolling into the dark, dusty shaft just as a line of bullets stitched across the ceiling where my head had been a second ago. I scrambled backward, deeper into the shaft, coughing in the dust. Below me, the gilded stalker let out a mechanical roar of frustration. Nowhere. Cathedral. I lay there for a moment in the dark, the metal duct pressing against my fractured ribs. Vex, I whispered, shaking. Where does this vent go? Accessing schematics, Vex replied. It leads to the central waste disposal chute. It drops all the way to the building's foundation. But what? The schematics are changing, Kaelen. The building geometry is shifting. The blueprints I downloaded 5 minutes ago, they no longer match the reality. The null code is rewriting the architecture. I looked down the dark tunnel of the vent. The metal walls seemed to be breathing. The rivets looked like eyes. We keep moving, I said. As long as we're moving, we're alive. I started to crawl. One-armed. Bleeding. Trapped in a golden tomb that was slowly waking up. And somewhere ahead of me, deep in the guts of the Zenith Spire, I heard a sound. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't the wind. It was a choir. A choir of 1,000 digital voices, singing a hymn to the void. Sanctus, Sanctus, Nullus. Vex, I asked, the dread pooling in my stomach. Do you hear singing? No, Vex replied, and its voice was genuinely disturbed. I hear nothing but the ventilation fans. Kaelen, if you are hearing music, then your Neuralink is compromised. You are tuning into their frequency. I kept crawling. The singing got louder. And deep down, in the part of me that was already infected, I realized the most terrifying truth of all. It was a beautiful song. The ventilation shaft was a throat and I was crawling down its gullet. It was tight. Too tight. The galvanized steel walls pressed against my shoulders, scraping the synthetic leather of my coat. The air here was stagnant, thick with the smell of dust, ozone, and something sweeter, the cloying scent of hydraulic fluid leaking from old pipes. I crawled on my knees in my one good hand. My severed right shoulder throbbed in time with the shuffling of my boots. Thump drag. Thump drag. Every movement sent a spike of white-hot agony through my chest, fractured ribs grinding against each other like tectonic plates. Vex, I whispered, the sound swallowed instantly by the dark. Distance to the waste chute? Unknown, Vex replied. The AI's voice was tight, stripped of its usual arrogance. I am attempting to map the duct network using sonar, but the data is returning wrong. Define wrong. The sound waves aren't bouncing back, Kaelen. They are continuing. According to my sensors, this straight tunnel we have been crawling in for 5 minutes is actually spiraling downward. We should be dizzy. We should be sliding. But gravity remains perpendicular to the surface. Non-Euclidean geometry, I muttered, tasting the copper of blood in my mouth. The null code is bending the building. Sanctus, Sanctus, Nullus. The singing was louder now. It vibrated in the metal beneath my hand. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a physical frequency. It felt like a dentist's drill boring into the root of a molar. 1,000 voices. Men, women, machines. All singing in perfect, terrifying harmony. You still don't hear it? I asked. I detect vibration in the air ducts, Vex said. Fan rotation. Air pressure differential. No vocals. Kaelen, your neural corruption level is at 18%. You are hallucinating auditory patterns. It's beautiful, I whispered, and the thought terrified me more than the pain. I kept crawling. The darkness ahead seemed to have texture, swirling like ink in water. Clang. Behind me. Far back. The sound of metal being torn apart. The gilded stalker was in the vents. Pursuit confirmed, Vex warned. Acoustic signature matches the gilded stalker. It is moving fast. It is deforming its chassis to fit the tunnel. I scrambled faster, ignoring the screaming of my ribs. The adrenaline from the Red-Haze cocktail spiked again, sharpening my vision to a pinpoint. Suddenly, the floor of the vent vanished. I didn't fall. I slid. The duct angled sharply downward, turning into a slide. I clawed at the smooth metal walls, my boots screeching for purchase, but it was like trying to climb a waterfall. I plummeted into the dark, twisting, turning. The world became a blur of gray steel and rushing wind. Whoosh! I shot out of the vent opening, sailing through the air for a terrifying second of weightlessness. I landed hard on a metal grating, rolling to absorb the impact. My momentum carried me forward until I slammed into a railing. I grabbed it with my left hand, stopping myself inches from a sheer drop. I gasped, wiping the dust from my eyes. I looked up, and then I forgot how to breathe. I wasn't in a waste disposal room. I wasn't in a basement. I was in the server core. But this wasn't like any server room I had ever raided in the lower sectors. There were no sleek black boxes. No blinking green LEDs. No cooling fans. It was a cathedral. The room was vast, a cylindrical silo that stretched up for hundreds of meters and down into an abyss of blue light. The walls were lined with thousands of alcoves, arranged like the honeycomb of a monstrous hive. And in each alcove there wasn't a computer. There was a human. They were stripped naked, their bodies pale and hairless, suspended in translucent tanks filled with amber fluid. Cables, thick, black, pulsating cables, were drilled directly into their skulls, their spines, their chests. They weren't dead. Their eyes were wide open, glowing blue, and their mouths were moving. Gloria? Excelsis? Data? They were the choir. Thousands of them. Singing. Not with vocal cords, but with raw data streaming from their mouths in visible waves of blue light. The sound I had heard in my head was the hum of their collective processing power. Vex, I whimpered, pulling myself back from the railing. What is this? Processing. Vex sounded glitched. Static cut through its voice. This is a biologic computation matrix. What we're processing. Zenith Corp. They aren't using silicon chips for their mainframe. They are using brains. Human brains. Kaelen, the processing power here. It is infinite. It is illegal in every jurisdiction on Earth. They're the sleepwalkers, I realized, staring at the face of a man in the nearest tank. I recognized him. A grocer from Sector 42 who went missing last month. They didn't disappear. They were harvested. Zenith kidnapped them, plugged them in, and turned them into a CPU. The horror of it was so vast, so industrial, that my brain refused to process it fully. This was the secret of the Spire. The wealth, the power, the advanced AI, it was all built on a foundation of enslaved human minds. Crunch. Above me, the vent I had fallen from exploded outward. A golden hand gripped the edge of the metal. The gilded stalker pulled itself out of the shaft. It hung from the wall like a spider made of bullion. Its blue eyes scanned the silo. Its rotary gun spun up. The flock must be silent. The machine roared, a sound of tearing metal, and leaped. It landed on the walkway 10 meters away from me. The impact shook the grating, nearly throwing me over the edge. I raised my pulse pistol. It felt like a toy against this thing. It fell silently into the abyss of blue light. I watched it tumble, turning over and over, until it was just a speck of gold swallowed by the deep. I slumped against the railing, laughing. A weak, hysterical wheeze. We did it, I choked out. We killed the gold man. Kaelen, Vex said. Look up. I stopped laughing. I looked up at the top of the silo where the ceiling should have been. There was no ceiling. The silo opened directly into the sky. But the sky wasn't there. The bone tower had docked. The tip of the inverted bone cathedral had penetrated the Zenith Spire. It was locked into the top of the server room like a key in a lock. And from the tip of the bone tower, a massive pulsating membrane was descending. It looked like an umbilical cord. It was connecting to the central hub of the human servers. They aren't attacking, Vex said, its voice filled with a cold, digital awe. They are downloading. Downloading what? The sleepwalkers. The mines. The bone tower. It's an ark, Kaelen. It's not an invasion fleet. It's a harvest ship. They are uploading the human consciousness into the void. The choir changed its tune. The discordance vanished. The singing unified into a single, deafening note of rapture. We are going home. The blue light in the tanks turned red. The fluid began to boil. The resonance is reaching critical mass, Vex warned. The physical structure of the tower cannot hold this much energy. The reality anchor is shattering. Kaelen, look at your hand. I looked at my hand, the flesh one. It was becoming translucent. I could see the bones underneath. I could see the blood pumping. And then I could see through the bones. I was fading. I'm disappearing, I whispered. You are phasing, Vex corrected. The reality breach is expanding. You are being pulled into the signal. The chip in my bag, the cortical stack I had stolen, began to burn. It wasn't cold anymore. It was white hot. I ripped the bag open. The chip floated out. It didn't fall. It hovered in the air in front of me, spinning. It projected a hologram. Not a flat image. A window. Through the window I saw a face. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a god. It was a girl. She looked young, maybe 12. She was sitting in a room made of white noise. She looked sad. "Help me," she said. Her voice wasn't digital. It was human. Terrifyingly human. "My name is Elara. I am the door." The hologram collapsed. The chip shot upward, flying toward the umbilical cord of the bone tower like a magnet. That chip. I realized, my mind reeling. It wasn't a memory core. It was a key. A prisoner. The floor beneath me groaned. The metal grating began to turn into bone. The railing turned into ribs. The transformation was accelerating. "Vex," I said, standing up on legs that felt like smoke. "We can't stay here. We'll be uploaded." "Agreed. But there is no exit. The elevator is fused. The vent is destroyed." I looked at the abyss below. The blue light. How deep is the coolant reservoir at the bottom? Sensors indicated depth of 50 meters. Liquid nitrogen and coolant mix. Survival probability of impact, 20%. Survival probability of freezing, 5%. Better than becoming a battery. I climbed over the railing. The choir screamed, a sound of triumph and hunger. "Join? Yes. Kaelen." I looked up at the bone tower one last time. "Not today," I said. I stepped off the edge. I fell. The wind rushed past me. The singing faded into a Doppler-shifted wail. I plummeted into the blue darkness, leaving the golden monsters and the singing dead behind, falling toward the frozen heart of the machine. And as I fell, the darkness whispered to me. Not the void. Not the enemy. But the girl. Elara. Catch me.